Welcome to Holly Hill Farms composting, backyard composting workshop. My name is Janice McPhillips. I'm a farm educator at Holly Hill Farm and have been there since 2008. I actually got started in this fun journey by helping to start a composting food scraps from lunch composting system at my kids' elementary school way back in 2001, believe it or not. And that sort of volunteer hobby turned into this wonderful job. And we teach at the farm, we teach at school gardens, we teach kids, we teach adults, and we're a nonprofit, as many of you know. Some of you are members, and thank you for your membership support. And it helps support our work. So I'm going to share my screen. And there you go. Can you all see that?
Yep.
Great. So the goal, like I said, by the end of this is to make you all feel empowered and ready to take on a backyard compost pile, or if you have one, to improve it. I can tell you, I speak from experience. I've made every mistake in the book. So I like to start out by showing people this picture because we have one little planet to grow food on, and compost plays a vitally important role for that because we are 3/4 of the earth is water, as you all know, and the little bit of soil that we have to grow on supports the food, growing of food for currently 7 billion people, but they say that by 2050 there will be 9 billion of us, and doing as much as we can to preserve and improve the quality of the soil upon which we grow our food is pretty primary. I think of compost as not only a backyard practice, a municipal practice, but really an important practice for the environment. It's related to climate change, as many of you may have heard. It's a political issue. There was just a soil health, Massachusetts Healthy Soils Bill was just passed. And Massachusetts now has a healthy soils plan, believe it or not, to regenerate the soil in Massachusetts. So it touches us on many levels and obviously affects how we eat and the quality of our food. I like to tell kids when they come to the farm, and I tell adults that, you know, at Holly Hill, we are growing vegetables and fruits and flowers and herbs, but we really start by growing soil. And so that's what this workshop is all about. So I'm not a soil scientist by training, but I am sort of an amateur soil geek. And I love to show this picture so people can understand the importance of what adding compost does and how it influences the health of soil. So as a nice little cross-sectional diagram of a soil profile, there's some grass and a carrot growing. And then as you dig down deeper, maybe you've seen this, if you ever dig a hole, you'll see that the quality of the soil changes as you get deeper and deeper. And boy, if you live in Cohasset or anywhere around here, anybody who lives in Cohasset knows that the name Cohasset comes from a Native American word, Conahasset, which means long rocky shore, I'm told. And you certainly know that there are rocks there. And that has to do with a thing that happened 10 to 12,000 years ago when the glaciers in this part of, that covered this part of North America, retreated and took a lot of the topsoil with it. So we're fighting against a really unfortunate thing that happened where a lot of our topsoil was eroded away. The farmers at Holly Hill have worked very hard to grow that topsoil layer back by adding a lot of organic matter. But every year over the course of the winter, between frost heaves and worms doing their work, moving things around, you can dig the rocks out of your garden. And then when you go back next spring after the winter, there'll be some new rocks, and it's because they've been moved through the soil through that process of soil frost heaving and worms and whatnot doing their work. But anyway, these are the different horizon layers of the soil, and the minerals that are in the soil and the minerals that wind up in that carrot get there because the microbes that live in the soil kind of move things around, and compost plays a important role in that. So if you were to do an analysis of what soil is made up, you can see about half of it is water, and pore space, airspace. And the rest of it is minerals and organic matter and the microorganisms and roots and things like that. But most of it is air and water. But minerals obviously are a huge part of it. Most soil around here is somewhere around 5% organic matter. And by organic matter, I mean sort of dead decomposing things, dead parts of plants, dead roots, um, and humus, which is actually just a stable, long chain carbon molecule, which is stable in the soil and is the part of the soil that is decomposed living things. The higher your organic matter, the better. I read an article recently that had an amazing thing. If you work hard and raise your organic matter 1%, so if you moved your organic matter percent from 5 to 6, an acre of ground can hold an additional 27,000 gallons of water, which is pretty important. We've had pretty dry summers over the last many years. And if you are trying to grow vegetables, flowers, anything, no matter what it is, if you increase your organic matter by taking care of your soil and growing it, meaning growing organic matter into the soil, your soil will be able to hold on to a lot more water. So here's an illustration of what soil looks like. If you were to do a very careful analysis of what's going on, those green blobs are the organic matter. The rusty colored blobs are soil minerals. And as water kind of flows and percolates through the soil, organic matter holds onto water. It's sticky. It has a positive charge or negative charge, and I guess water has a positive charge. So water holds, organic matter helps soil hold on to water, which is great. Like I said, 27,000 extra gallons of water can be held onto for every 1% increase in organic matter, which would need more of those green blobs in your soil. So here's just a look at what different kinds of soil would look like. So the picture on the left with the two hands doesn't take an expert to know that there's a pretty obvious difference between what's in that person's left hand and right hand. The right hand is spent, dry, probably clayey, sandy, chalky looking soil, not very rich looking. And the sample that's in the left hand obviously is much more rich and brown. Organic matter just by composition is much darker, and soil that's rich in organic matter will be dark brown like what's in the left hand there. So the picture on the bottom right here, you see these two squares of blocks of soil side by side. The one on the left has 1% organic matter and it has sort of a rusty color. And the one on the right has 5% organic matter and it's a lot darker. The picture at the top right, I don't know how well that comes across on your screen, but that's what a soil sample looks like after a rainstorm. And maybe you've all seen this if you ever have seen what a garden looks like after after a rain. You know, the water, if there's not a lot of organic matter in the soil, the water will basically just run off the soil, take nutrients and topsoil with it. And I bet you anything, if you felt that, it would feel like a hard, crusty, have a hard, crusty feeling to it, which is not good. What you want is when it rains, assuming it's a gentle rain, not a deluge of a storm, but you want the water to percolate into the soil. And if your soil is rich with organic matter, that will happen. It will not look like what's in that picture there. Okay, so now you're all inspired and let's dive in. So compost is both a noun and a word. The physical stuff is called compost, and it's also the verb that describes the actual doing of that. So if I eat an apple and I say I'm gonna compost my apple core, that's the verb for you wordsmiths out there. So when we're all done here, I'm happy to send, I have everyone's email, I'm happy to send you a copy of these slides so that you can, if you want to refer back to them, but here's 10 reasons why making compost is an important thing to do. And the first is that really composting is just a type of recycling. The nutrient in that apple core that I'm going to recycle can turn into the finished product of compost, which I can then use in my garden, on my grass. I can give it to somebody, I can do lots of things with it. And because of that, it saves on garbage. And as I mentioned earlier, if you live in Cohasset, Scituate, I believe, is also a pay-as-you-throw town. I've got a slide that's coming up that will show you that approximately a third of our garbage trash is compostable food waste and paper, things like paper towels and whatnot. And if you are paying for your trash, or even if you're not paying for your trash, someone here said they live in Weymouth, so you don't actually pay for your trash, it's just collected. But why send something to the trash when you can actually use it to make something and recycle it locally? Our trash around here is not landfilled. It actually goes to a waste energy burn plant called Covanta CMAS, which is in Wareham. And they burn it, and obviously that has emissions, and there's an ash that's associated with that that has to be landfilled. So making compost, keeping your food waste out of the trash, saves from having that. But for people who do live in places where there's landfill, um, maybe you've heard that if you do put a compostable item in a landfill, it really will not biodegrade. It will not decompose because in order for decomposition to happen, it needs air, and there's no air in a landfill system. So what actually happens is it emits methane, which I'm sure you've heard is a powerful greenhouse gas. So that's not a good thing. If you use compost, then you can add that to your garden or your grass or your fruit tree or whatever you have out in your yard, and save on purchasing a bagged up or liquid fertilizer, which is most often made from natural gas. And most importantly, compost improves soil health. Like I said before, when you're using compost, you are growing organic matter in your soil. And there's some evidence that that actually can reduce plant diseases, can increase crop yields. We know it improves the water holding capacity of soil. It improves something called soil tilt, just structure of the soil. It just looks different. Decreases soil runoff. And most importantly, as I said before, compost builds soil organic matter in the form of humus. There's even talk about legislation of trying to figure out how to quantify and possibly monetize this soil building, carbon soil building, and possibly paying farmers to sequester their carbon in the soil. I think it's pretty, they haven't quite figured out how to quantify it and monetize it yet, but it's kind of like a carbon cap and trade system, but instead of emissions, we're talking soil here. But that last item, number 10, is really the most important thing, that what composting does is it adds beneficial microorganisms to the soil. And that is really important for reasons that we will talk a little bit more about. So this is a lovely pie chart that came from a 2019, believe it or not, a waste characterization study that Mass DEP did. And as you can see on the right there, food waste and compostable paper, which is paper towels, napkins, things like that, makes up almost 30% of what went into the waste stream just here in Massachusetts. So that's really incredible to think about that. 30% of our trash is stuff that could be composted. So I live in Hingham, and in our town last, well, I don't have the 2020 data yet, but for 2019, the town disposed 5,444 tons of trash. So a third of that is 1,633 tons, which of that 444, 1,633 tons of it is compostable food waste. And it comes at a cost, actually. Back in 2019, the cost was $83 a ton to dispose of it. So that's 135,000. Now the cost is going up. And that's true for all towns around here. So like I said, it's not only an environmental issue, it's a huge economic issue. And it's one of the reasons why I advocate for this, because if you're an environmentalist, obviously this will resonate with you. And if you care about the bottom line for your town, then that's important as well. So anyway, here's how you do it. Now that you're convinced that this is a great idea, this is a graphic that's available on the Mass Department of Environmental Protection website. Lovely graphic for how you make a compost pile. And it's very easy. Basically, you just have 3 parts of stuff that they call brown. And there's a list there of what's brown. So it's leaves, straw, salt marsh, hay, shredded newspaper, cardboard, stuff like that. And then 1 part green. And for most people, the green would be your fruit and vegetable food waste. And even though coffee grounds are brown in color, they are considered a green. It has to do with the nitrogen and carbon content of the items. So don't let the color fool you. Coffee ground, horse manure, things like that are considered greens. Add some water, because what you're doing is feeding a diverse ecosystem of microbes, things you can't see with a naked eye. You'd need a microscope, and things you can see like worms and millipedes and spiders and ants and beetles and all kinds of things that live in that compost pile. So they need water. Um, the reason why you need to add soil microbes every once in a while is because what you really want is for, as you layer up this pile, you want sort of to inoculate this pile with these beneficial microbes at many levels. If you were to make a pile that was 3 feet tall, the microbes would work their way up from the bottom where the ground is, assuming the pile was built on the ground, touching the ground. But then the stuff at the top would take longer to decompose. But if you mix it around and you add a shovelful of either finished compost, if you have it, or just any soil from your yard, because they say that there are 6 billion little microbes in a teaspoon of soil. So if you add a shovelful of soil every so often, you're going to be adding beneficial microbes to that pile, and it'll help the pile decompose. And after 2 months, you'll have what gardeners refer to as black gold. So here's just a review again of what's green and what's brown. And like I said, don't let the color fool you. Coffee grounds and manures are considered green, and it has to do with the ratio of nitrogen and carbon atoms in each of the materials. So leaves and sawdust and newspaper towels are browns, and food scraps and manures and seaweed and grass clippings are all greens. Mix them up and put them in a pile. So here's my countertop composting container that I keep right next to my kitchen sink. And I put my coffee cup in there so you can see for size. This is a little prettier than the one I used to have, which was a plastic bin. You don't need a fancy bin like that. I bought that at a place called Gardener's Supply. You don't need, you can just put it in a bowl. You can put it in a Ziploc bag, but that's what I use. And as I said before, like in the picture, you just sort of making a layer cake. You're mixing in your browns and your greens and a shovelful of soil. Make sure to water it and stir it, and the stuff will decompose, and it's magic. So here's the do not add list. If you are using a backyard composting pile, the rules are a little different. If you have a compost pickup service, which, I hope you'll try doing it in your own backyard first before you resort to something like that. But no meat, no dairy, bones, animal or cat, any kind of animal manure, human waste, no weeds that have gone to seed. And the reason for that is because what can happen is they won't decompose in the process of backyard composting. You need high heat to kill weed seeds, and most backyard piles won't get quite that hot. And same thing with diseases. And it's the same reason, David, as you were asking before about that persistent herbicide. The composting process won't necessarily decompose chemicals that are in grass, or if you've had your trees sprayed with chemicals to prevent gypsy moths and things like that. I don't know if those chemicals will decompose in the process of composting. So I try and only have clean ingredients going into my compost. And that last thing, weeds that spread with runners. There's a weed around here called, well, there's a couple of things. Garlic mustard, you don't want to put in your compost because that will not decompose. And then when you spread the compost around, you could potentially be spreading the weed seeds of garlic mustard. So we throw it away actually at the farm. And I would recommend the same for you. Same thing with things like poison ivy or this weed called quackgrass that spreads by runners. I would not put those in your compost. So where to put it? If you have a choice in your yard, I would put it in a flat place if possible and near your garden, and put it in the shade. A lot of people think it needs to be in the sun because that's what makes it heat up, but that's actually not true. The thing that makes a compost pile heat up is the activity of the microbes that are living in the pile. They're digesting that food and they're giving off heat, and that's why a compost pile heats up. And as I said before, you're going to want to make sure to water your compost pile, so keep it near a water source. Okay, so here are some pictures of compost bins. The left one is at a school in Citrus, that's Heatherly School. Those are called New Age composters, and they are available. Some towns sell these, have a list that's part of this presentation that will tell you where you can get some of these. As I said, I live in Hingham, and actually the DPW in Hingham is going to start selling these New Age composters next month. The one on the right there is called an earth machine. If you live in Cohasset, you can get one of these through the DPW. And I have a list, a link to a list so you can find out if your town sells one of these. But you don't have to buy a compost bin. You can make one. On the left there is one that's been made out of pallets. And you know, it looks like they just sort of put these together. They put it against a wall there for support. But actually, in my community garden, we built something like this, and we just got some heavy 2x4s. I think we used to kind of brace the corners, and you know, you can see they've bungeed a door together just to sort of keep things in. This is not going to keep critters out. If you live in a place where you think you might have raccoons or squirrels or chipmunks or well, squirrels and chipmunks are going to cause too much trouble, but you know, rats and things like that that could get in, you might want something that's a little more secure. On the right is a beautiful system built by a guy named Don Canetta who lives in Cohasset. Maybe some of you know him. That's in his yard, and as you can see, he's got his bays labeled. You see how it's number 3 take, number 1 add, number 2 cook. So those are movable signs. So number 1 is the add to pile. Cook means it's cooking, it's decomposing, let it sit, it's not quite done. And number 3, take, well, that's what you take away from. So every time you dig a hole and you plant your tomatoes or you want to fertilize your favorite rose bush or whatever, you take from there. So that's a really nice system that he's got there. This is a great rat-proof composting system. You can sort of see that the top is covered with, looks like a plasticky material, and the sides and the bottom of this one are lined with chicken wire to prevent rats and whatever to get in. So if you think you live in a place where you might have troubles with rats, you can make a system like this. I have these plans. If you want, I could send them to you, free, available online. And then here's the ever popular compost tumbler, which a lot of people like because they're very easy to turn. And as I said before, compost needs turning for to add oxygen to the pile, because those microbes that are doing the work of decomposition need oxygen, and these tumblers really make it easy to turn. Problem with the tumbler system is that they're off the ground. And as I said before, you know, you need microbes to make a decomposition happen. And so what is really important if you have one of these is to keep track, make sure that it doesn't dry out. This one on the left here is in bright sunshine, and the stuff that's inside there would cook in the sun, and it might be likely to dry out. There's no way for rain to get in there. So these actually are easier in some respects because they're easy to turn, but they do need a lot of monitoring. But as you can see, that one on the left there has wheels. So it looks like it might be easy to just wheel it around and maybe put it somewhere where it's near a hose to make sure it stays moist. And don't forget to add a shovelful of soil every once in a while to make sure that there's decomposers in that chamber before you turn it. These are kind of expensive. Last time I looked, they're well over $100. And I would say that this is the opposite end of the spectrum, just sort of a loose pile. Looks like they've put some leaves. It's not a very clear resolution picture, but you can sort of see on the right there, they've just kind of tossed things in and added some leaves and whatnot. And on the left there, that it looks like galvanized wire. They've just made a circle, and you can sort of see they've made layers like a layer cake. I think they did that for demonstration purposes. I would want to mix that up. But over time, even if you didn't mix it over time, what would happen is everything in that pile would sort of decompose, and the worms would kind of move things around. But you're better off mixing it all together instead of leaving it as layers. You can make your own tumbler, your DIY tumbler, by taking a trash can, just sort of a plastic trash can that you could get at any hardware store, and drilling holes in it. You can probably see there's holes in the top, and there's also holes along the side here. And the beauty of that is that you put your ingredients in and put it on its side and just kick it like you see there, roll it around, and there you go. You have a DIY tumbler for a lot less than those fancy ones on wheels. Okay, so as I said before, you can get a compost bin from your town. The DPW in Cohasset sells that earth machine. Braintree also sells earth machines. Sometimes they require that you be a resident, but I live in Hingham, and a friend of mine who lives here got a couple of those earth machines from Cohasset. They didn't actually ask him if he was a resident, so I guess it depends how many of them they have and if they're really anxious to sell them. Marshall, they have them. And as I said, Hingham is going to start selling new age composters in April. But you can click on that link, and it will show you where you can get them. There are other towns in the state that have them. So don't despair. You can find one. We don't sell them at Holly Hill Farm, unfortunately. Anyway, as I said, what is it that is making compost happen? Well, it's really the microorganisms that you can't see. They're doing the work of breaking down all that food waste. There are other things you can see, ants and spiders and millipedes and whatnot, and then of course worms. And then air and water are kind of critical. Mixing is important, and after time, you will have finished compost. So here's a great picture of the food web of the compost pile. And as you can see at the top, you got the stuff with the choppers, the thing that have the ability to sort of mechanically break down food. So beetles and millipedes and centipedes and things like that. And then you've got smaller things like worms and spiders and beetles and things like that. And then the stuff you can't see with your naked eye, the bacteria and the fungi and whatnot. It's a really great science teaching opportunity for children. Compost pile is a great ecosystem to study. And if you've mixed everything properly, and if your pile is big enough, as you can see, that's a compost thermometer. I have one at my house, and we have several at the farm. And if it's mixed properly and the pile is big enough, it has sort of a critical mass to hold heat, you might get high enough temperatures to kill weed seeds. And as you can see, that thermometer is well over 140. So how long will it take? Everybody wants to know, when am I going to have finished compost? So the answer is, it depends on what you put in the pile. If you put a thing, you know how it in the fall you can find fresh Brussels sprouts that come on the stem and has a thick woody stem. If you put something like that into a compost pile, it's going to take a long time for it to decompose. You can hasten the process by chopping it up. If you have a chipper shredder, you could do that. Same thing for things like tomato stalks and things like that. They'll take a long time to break down. But, you know, I throw coffee grounds in my compost, I throw, you know, peels and apple cores and things like that. And those things disappear pretty quickly. So if you are paying close attention to what you put into your compost and what it looks like, and if it's moist enough, the stuff will decompose. And if you turn it every so often, and I would say in like starting around now, this time of year, I'll start turning my pile, oh, I don't know, maybe once every other week. It's hard work. It's hard on your back. So I don't do it that often, but the more you turn it, the more quickly the stuff will decompose. So, you know, the best you can probably do is about 2 months. If you do absolutely nothing, it will decompose. It may take as long as a year. And how do you know when it's done? Well, you'll just be able to tell because it'll have the look of crumbly soil. It'll just look like soil. It'll be very dark. You won't be able to see the raw materials you put in there. Some things, like I said, do take longer to decompose than others. So you might see corn cobs, avocado pits take a long time to decompose, and the stalk of that Brussels sprouts will take a long time to decompose. It should smell good. And if you stuck a thermometer in it, it should be ambient temperature, won't be hot. So what do you do with it? Well, you sift it. So here is a homemade compost sifter. Those are just plain old 2x4s with some galvanized hardware cloth. I think that's a 1/4-inch grid. Nail it on there, and you've got a sifter that fits on top of a wheelbarrow. It's a really fun activity. And the stuff that doesn't fall through the sifter is the stuff that goes back into the compost pile. So the stalks that haven't decomposed, sticks, things like that, that take longer to decompose, just throw them back in the compost pile. The stuff that falls into the wheelbarrow is the stuff that's ready to use. And how do you use it? Well, you can put it on your veggie garden. You can give it to trees or shrubs. You can even use it on your grass if you're seeding a part of your lawn. You can make a potting soil with it. You can make compost tea, give it away. You don't have to have a vegetable garden. Just know that there's always a way to use it or gift it. So what can go wrong? Like I said, I've made every one of these mistakes. One year, many years ago, I dug into my compost pile and I found out that our mother rat had babies in the compost pile over the winter. That was not a happy thing to discover. If it's not mixed properly, it can smell bad. If you put too much grass clippings in that pile, remember the picture I showed you where there was very obvious what looked like lasagna layers? If you were to leave a thick layer of grass clippings in a compost pile, it could potentially get slimy, because what happens is grass clippings tend to compress and squeeze out airspace. And when organic material, like grass, and by organic, I don't mean organic food, I mean like material, living stuff, when it starts to decompose without air, it's what is called anaerobic decomposition, and it gives off some really stinky, smelly compounds that also are slimy. So if you do put grass clippings into your compost, that's a good thing. I would just encourage you to mix it around so that you don't have a thick layer of grass clippings, because that's going to cause trouble. And depending on how your compost is situated, you might actually get some puddles of leachate, which is just the moisture from the food waste kind of leaching out of the pile. And that's not necessarily a good thing either. It can attract flies if you put meat in. It's one of the reasons why we say no meat or dairy into a compost pile, because it can actually attract flies, which will lay eggs, which are what maggots are. Now, it doesn't really bother me as much as you might think it should, because actually flies are decomposers. And there are some people, there's a thing called black soldier fly larvae composting, where it's an industrial process where they actually feed food waste to these black soldier fly larvae, and they're very efficient decomposers, but most backyard composters don't want that. So again, if you keep everything mixed properly, this will not happen. So snow, we didn't have a too bad snowy winter, but my compost piles were frozen a couple times this winter and very difficult to get the top off. And then when they're covered with snow, it's not easy to get into them. So I, many years ago, started making worm compost in bins in my garage. And we're not really going to talk about that today. That's another workshop that we usually do in the fall, because I think of that as something that people do over the winter, but you can make vermicompost anytime of the year, especially if you are an apartment dweller and don't have a backyard, or you just want another way of composting. You can make a worm composting bin. So here's what we do at Holly Hill Farm. This is sort of a happy memory of a sad thing, which is that this truck is filled with some apples that were given to us from Wellspring. And I guess they were not good enough quality apples to give to their food pantry clients. And so they give them to us at Holly Hill Farm, and we sometimes pick through them and make applesauce or apple whatever, so as not to throw them in the compost pile. But it's kind of shocking actually how much food comes back from the food pantries. And we get food from the food pantry in Hingham as well as Wellspring and Hull, stuff that, like I said, that they can't donate to their clients. And so we put it in, we try and use the food, whatever food comes to us, if possible. But if not, it goes, some of it gets fed to the chickens at the farm, and some of it will go into our compost piles. We collect about 40 5-gallon buckets a week. We have a very small scale food composting business, I guess I would call it. And mostly at this point, what we're doing is just capturing food waste from a few restaurants, coffee shops, and the 2 food pantries for the purpose of making compost for the farm. That's our goal. So we are not trying to make enough to sell, although last year we sold a little bit of it. And we use it on the farm, and we take it to school gardens and use it there. So here's some teenagers that were part of our farm to food pantry program, and they were getting involved in helping the process. So it's basically a mix of horse manure, cardboard that you can see there, food waste, wood chips, and leaves, and that's our recipe. So I don't know if you've ever seen this, anybody who's taken a walk at Holly Hill Farm. It's a panoramic picture, so it's kind of a funny view, but that's actually at the top of our Pex Meadow. This is our composting system. We're using something called an aerated static composting pile. Those 2 black pipes that you can see with the white cap at the end is an aerated a pipe. There's a pump, air pump, kind of behind that cement wall back there, that pumps air through those pipes and eliminates the need to stir these piles, because they're big. Each of those batches is about 4 or 5 yards of material, so that would be a lot to stir. And it's just a system that I read about many years ago, so we designed this, and it's kind of neat, actually. The pump is powered by these two batteries that are recharged by a solar panel. So the whole thing is a sustainable, low impact system. And we're making, like I said, we're making batches of about 4 or 5 yards, leaves and food waste and manure from the farm and wood chips. And we're producing about 50 yards of compost a year for use on the farm. So as I said before, compost is not only an environmental issue, it's a money issue. And we talked about the money before, but here's some information that I found from the Environmental Protection Agency. They have something called the WARM model, which stands for waste and, I forget what WARM stands for. But they have an estimate that for every ton of food waste that's composted, it saves 0.76 metric tons of carbon emissions. And also 392 gallons of gas is saved for every ton of food waste. So for our system at the farm, we're composting about 45,000 pounds of food waste a year. So that's 22 tons. So we estimate we're saving about 17.1 tons of carbon emissions from our little system, just our one little, very small system, and about 8,000 gallons of gas. That's the equivalent of 8,000 gallons of gas burned. So what does one individual make? Well, I think, I mean, I don't know, every household is different, but I guesstimate that in my household, it's just my husband and me. Our kids are out of the house, but I think we compost somewhere between 5 and 10 pounds of food waste a week. It depends on how much cooking we're doing. But, you know, just for my one household of 2 people, I'm saving 0.26 tons of carbon from being emitted into the atmosphere. And not a huge saving, the 100 gallons of gas, but you know, it's something. But then if you add it up on the town, a whole town-wide basis, those numbers I threw at you earlier, Hingham collected 5,444 tons of trash in 2019. And if all of that was composted, which is obviously idealistic and sadly unrealistic, but if it was, it would save the equivalent of 640,000 gallons of gas from being burned and 4,000 tons of carbon emissions into the air. So pretty big environmental impact. And for those of you that are thinking about or wondering about climate change, and as I said before, there's some work to that's just beginning to sort of figure out how we can measure and possibly monetize saving carbon in the soil. Maybe you've heard this phrase about people using carbon as soil as a carbon sink. Maybe you've heard about trees as a carbon sink. Well, you know that trees sequester carbon in the actual physical part of the tree. It's all carbon. The actual trunk of the tree, the bark and whatnot, is all carbon. But carbon can be sequestered in soil, and all of that work of microbes taking carbon out of the atmosphere, that's what plants do. They take carbon in the form of carbon dioxide through their leaves, and they pump out oxygen, as you know. But there's a famous soil microbiologist named Elaine Ingham who has done a lot of work to educate people about this soil food web. And what we now know is what's going on in below the ground is that plants are exuding sugars through their roots to feed all of the microbes that are living in the soil, doing the work of mobilizing nutrients for the plants to eat. I say eat, but basically turn it into food for the plants that then becomes that carrot that we eat, or anything you're growing. And then a happy byproduct of that is that all of those microbes that are living in the soil that got there because of you maybe adding compost to the soil, those microbes are doing the job of making these long chain carbon molecules that after time, I mean, that's how fossil fuels came to be made. After time and lots of pressure and heat turned into fossil fuels. But in the shorter term, what's happening is that all the carbon that's in the soil in terms of these long chain carbon molecules are building the carbon in the soil. And that's what this carbon sequestration process is. It's basically microbes doing the work of sinking carbon into the soil. So it's a complicated topic. People write books about compost. I have a whole collection of books here next to me if anybody wants to know books to read. There's lots of information on the Mass DEP's website. The EPA has a great website about composting. I have a 2-page document that I'm happy to send to anybody who's interested that has all kinds of resources about how-tos and more information if you want to do a deeper dive. And the last slide, I very hesitantly am going to put up here, that if you've decided that this is just too much for you, but you want to compost, there's a couple of companies, a handful, 3 companies, that will actually come and get your compost and take it away, and they will compost it and sell it. Black Earth Compost is on the North Shore. City Compost is actually west. They're somewhere between here and Amherst, and Bootstrap is also, I think they're based in Somerville. So my only gripe with these companies is that they're driving their trucks from pretty far away to get here and take your stuff away. Like I said, we at Holly Hill do have a small scale composting business, but I don't know that we're in the position to add any more customers at this point. But what I really hope is that people won't do that, that people will say, oh, that doesn't look so hard. I can do that myself, and I don't need to hire a food waste pickup company. I can do this myself. So on that note, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up to questions, and I would love to hear what you think, and tell me if you think you might be able to do this yourself. Tell me what problems you've had, successes, failures, questions.
Okay, I have a question about cardboard. Is all cardboard okay to put in compost, or is some of it not so good?
So here's what I'm going to say about cardboard. So the compost that we're making at the farm is, we are required to be certified organic, right? So we have to follow different restrictions than you would. We're not allowed to use any colored cardboard. So like, you know, Sam Adams beer, for example, comes in, I know there's some blue ink on the side of the box. We're not allowed to use any of that colored cardboard in our compost. And maybe they know something that I don't know. I mean, I know some of these inks may also not decompose, and you may not want to take the finished compost from colored cardboard and put it in your food garden, because you don't know if that's going to wind up in your tomatoes, for example. So cardboard will decompose. Actually, cardboard is a great thing to put in a compost, because actually the worms that live in the soil that just are here naturally like the cardboard. They like the glue in the cardboard. There's sugar in it, I guess, that they like. But I think you're better off staying away from colored cardboard. And the other thing about cardboard is, I would take anything, like if you get a box that's been shipped to you, take the tape off, take the label off, just basically make it as clean cardboard as possible.
Yeah. Okay, so how about like shredded paper? In my office, I have a shredder and I shred paper all the time. And is that okay? Or is there the ink on it not so good to put it?
Yeah, so paper in general is okay. The only thing about shredded paper is that ink may have some heavy metals in it that you may not want in your compost.
Okay.
So I guess I would say you're better off recycling it.
Okay.
But I want to tell you, I read something, I read this is a great book that I read many years ago. And one of the things that she talks about in this book is the fact that there are many places that will take sewage sludge and compost it with worm. I don't know if you've ever heard of this worm composting, but basically it's a very intensive process of taking, probably on the scale that a sewage treatment plant would do it, where they would take tons and tons of sewage sludge, excuse me, and then tons of worms, and the worms would basically eat up all of those heavy metals, and it actually wouldn't hurt the worms, it wouldn't kill the worms, but it would sort of clean up the compost. So it's actually something that it's not done around here because there's not enough land, but the example in the book was a sewage treatment plant in California where they had a lot of open land. And sort of an interesting related story to that is, you know, back in the 60s when Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring. Maybe you all remember that the reason why DDT was banned was because I think it was eagles, wasn't it? The eagles were eating the worms that had been in fields where DDT had been sprayed. And so the DDT weakened the worms' eggs, sorry, not the worms' eggs, the eagle's eggs, right? And so the EPA got involved and they took DDT off the market. But the important thing to consider there is that the DDT didn't kill the worms. What happened was the DDT got into the worms' bodies. The eagles ate the worms, and then it affected the eagles' eggs. So I don't know enough about the chemistry of all of this stuff, but years ago I took a class and a smart guy who was an organic chemist talked about the fact that, many of these chemicals, back to your question about your office paper, a lot of the chemicals that are in fertilizers and chemicals that are in paper will get decomposed by either the microorganisms or the worms, and they are turned into something that's safe. But there's no, well, there's very expensive ways to assure that those chemicals are removed from the soil, but no backyard gardener is going to do that. And we're not even going to pay to have that kind of testing done on our compost. You'd have to have a very, like a very highly technical analytical chemistry lab to test your finished product to see if those chemicals are gone. And so we're not, we can't pay for that. But I'm sure that's the kind of thing that, someone in a research lab would take on. And it's an interesting question, but I think the easiest thing to do is to just put clean ingredients into your compost. You're better off putting the newspaper in, because I happen to know that the Boston Globe, I think the New York Times, are all printed on paper that is printed with soy-based ink, and that will decompose and not cause any problems in the finished product. But copy paper, I would stay away from, and ink on cardboard, same thing.
Okay, thanks.
I had a question about the worm composting systems. I've read a lot about that, and I do the bokashi indoor composting right now with the food scraps. So I was just curious. I live in the city right now, but I'm moving to Cohasset, so I've never had the space or anything to do the outdoor stuff. But so you don't recommend adding anything. It's just the leaves, the scraps. You don't need to add worms to it. It just sort of happens on its own. You would never mix those different sorts of systems.
So, I mean, I have never done bokashi. I've read about it. I know a little bit about it, but and I know when you're done with the finished product that you get, don't you have to then take that and put that in an outdoor compost pile to sort of finish?
Yeah, so I use it. It creates the compost tea that I use on houseplants, but then you're still left with solids that then have to go in an actual compost.
My understanding of bokashi is that it's an anaerobic decomposition process, which is the same as the MWRA tanks by the airport, Deer Island. It's basically an anaerobic, like you put stuff in a tank and then seal the lid and sort of let it cook for a certain amount of time, correct?
Yes. Yep.
Right. So the stuff that comes out of the MWRA digestate, they call it, is usually composted in some sort of a system, and like either composted with worms, like the example I was telling you from this book, where they talk about this huge water treatment plant, sewage treatment plant in California, or on a very small scale where you get a couple of cups of something. Usually you throw it into an aerobic composting pile. So you could do that. You could continue your bokashi in your house or garage, wherever you do it. And the advantage of a bokashi system is that you can throw anything in there. You can put meat or bones or fish or dairy or whatever, which I would not recommend doing in an outdoor pile. Okay, so, but to your earlier question, you asked about, do you have to add anything or worms or whatnot? So as I said before, every teaspoon of soil, some poor graduate student had to figure this out, that, in a teaspoon of soil, just like a little teaspoon that fits in the palm of your hand, there are 6 billion different bacteria. And these are beneficial bacteria, not harmful bacteria, that do the work of decomposing stuff. So if you put a pile, like I showed in one of my slides, if you just put a pile out there in your lawn somewhere, there's decomposers that are going to come find, that food. It's the reason why, for example, if you take a walk in the woods, leaves will decompose over the course of the winter. I often point out to kids, why is it that when you take a walk in the woods, nobody goes back into a trail back in Wampatuck State Park, nobody rakes, well, why are we not, buried up deeper and deeper in leaves every year? And the reason is because the decomposers eat those leaves over the winter. And so the volume of the pile shrinks as the decomposition process happens. And part of the reason why it shrinks is because the moisture in the leaves dissipates, evaporates, and then some of it volatilizes off as carbon dioxide, which is part of the cycle. Carbon dioxide comes into the leaves, which is how they make the sugar for the plants, which is what the sap is. And they send sugar through the roots to feed the microbes that are in the soil. And then they use the sugar to make the body of the tree. So it's just all a carbon, part of the carbon cycle. Anyway, did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Anybody else? Do you feel ready? I can't see your faces, so I can't tell if people are smiling or
I'm
feeling
ready.
overwhelmed or ready.
I'm ready. My brother Dave, you're ready, right?
So
Oh, maybe.
I think you said you just have a pile in your backyard.
I just. Who, me?
Yeah.
Yes. You're gonna email us that whole slideshow thing?
I could do that.
Everybody?
I can, if you
That would be
don't,
good.
maybe the easiest thing to do is, well, I have everybody's email. This has been recorded. I meant to tell you that earlier, sorry. And I will save the recording and I'll put it on our YouTube channel privately so that since you all paid to be here today, thank you very much for that. If you want to rewatch it, I'll send you the PDF of the slides. And I also have this document that I created that has a bunch of different resources of websites that you can visit, books that you can read. I have I'm going to show you my favorite book, which has the funniest title ever. Can you see that? And actually, you know something? It's a good book. It's about the history of managing manure over the millennia. And many cultures gone by knew that there was value in manure, and they didn't throw it away. They threw it on their fields because they knew that it would regenerate their soil. And in fact, another one that I have, which I didn't pull off my shelf, maybe I did. I have a book called Cows Will Save the Planet. And basically what it's about is the same thing. It's about using cow manure to regenerate the soil. Here's another good book if you haven't read this. But all of this is in my, actually, this is another really great book for anybody who's wanting to learn about sort of all the microbial life that's in the soil. And for anybody who's on social media, there's an organization called the U.S. Composting Council, and they sponsor a fun theme week every year. The first week in May is called International Compost Awareness Week, and they post all kinds of great things, fun education, information, videos of people doing different kinds of composting and whatnot. So if you're on Facebook or Instagram, look them up. U.S. Composting Council International Compost Awareness Week.
Well, thank you. I want to thank you. Thank you for spending some time with us and teaching us what you know. I'm ready. I'm going for it. I'm excited.
So do you, and what do you have? What's your composting system at home?
I have none right now.
Oh.
So I've tried in the past in other places I've lived, but for me, it's just my next step. I'm excited.
And are you in Cohasset also?
Yeah. I live off Forest Ave, actually a short walk through the woods to you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I will be very curious to know if you find that taking your food waste out of your trash makes a big difference in what you take to your transfer station. Do you have trash pickup at home, or are you a person that?
No, we don't.
So you go to the dump.
Actually, I own a business. I go to my dumpster. basically. So,
Okay.
um, but I've composted in the past. I had one of those compost tumblers, and it was okay. It's just like you said, you have to add water, and it's tough to get the soil out once it's done. And also when you have a compost that's almost done and you continue to add to it, I think you really need multiple piles, because like I saw that picture, one bin, 3 bins. I really like that idea, because if you have a single pile, you have some compost that's done, but you're continuing to add new stuff, and then it's not done. And so I really like the idea of the multiple piles. I think that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I don't think I made that point as uh, strongly as I should have, that 3-bake composting system is really the way to go for exactly what you
Yeah.
just said. Because at some point, remember the pile that I told you was made by that guy Don who lives in Cohasset. At some point, you need to just let a pile sit and cook, and
Right.
you have to not add to it. So what I'm going to say about those rotary bins for anybody that does have one of those, what I recommend to people, some people, that's a good idea for somebody that might have critters in their yard. If you have raccoons or you're worried about skunks getting into your compost or whatever, the thing to do is to let the food decompose, get to the point of being mostly broken down in the bin, keep turning it, make sure it's moist, make sure you've added a shovel of compost. And when it gets to the point where it doesn't really look like physical food anymore, but it's not fully decomposed, you can empty out the bin and put that somewhere else in your yard, mix it with leaves and whatnot to kind of, disperse the smells a little bit. And then you've got an empty bin to start of adding to. So the pile that you've taken out of the rotary bin and put somewhere over there in your yard, that becomes the cook pile. Okay. Because you're right. You do need more than one of those rotary bins, and they're expensive. So if you're kind of committed to that as a way to make this work for you, that's one way you can get around having 3 of those. I don't know that I would recommend that anyone have 3 of those bins, because I think at some point you're just going to need to let it sit.
Yeah.
And you don't need to have a rotary bin if you're just going to let it sit.
Right. Yep.
And once you let that sit, then the critters that you could be potentially worried about won't be bothering it, because
Nope.
food stuff has broken down, correct?
No, and actually, I have to tell you a funny story. So I'm at home right now, and I didn't do this on purpose, but my compost bins are right out there, right out my window. I can see them, and I wish I'd had my phone on video mode, because one day I was sitting at my desk here and I saw these 2 raccoons kind of walking slowly towards my compost bins, and I was like, oh no, they found it. I can't believe this. And I didn't capture this on video, but I'm telling you the truth when I tell you these 2 raccoons, they walked past my compost bins, climbed up the fence in the back of my yard, and went into my neighbor's yard, right past my compost. I was so thrilled. I was like, oh, they didn't smell whatever was in there. And I don't remember what time of year it was, but it wasn't winter. There's no snow on the ground, but they just kept on going.
Yeah, they follow their noses. If they smell garbage, they'll come. But a finished compost starts to smell like just fresh dirt and stuff. They won't bother it, I think.
Yeah. Well, as soon as this workshop is over, I'm going to go outside and go stir my compost. It's time to start taking the stuff out. I actually, I'm going to plant peas soon, and it's time to start using it. But what I do, I guess I didn't actually talk about this earlier, but I've got those 3 bins. And so, little by little, my take from bin is going to be empty, right? So what I will do is take the stuff with a garden fork and move it physically from one bin to the other. And just the process of taking it and moving it from one bin to the other aerates it. And that helps speed up the process. So what was the cook bin then gets moved to a different bin, gets moved from cook to add. Am I saying that right? Well, but if you have, you've taken everything out of your take pile, so the take is empty. So you take the cook bin and you stir it from there, and then you move your labels around just so you know which is which. You can really tell by looking at them.
Right.
The other thing I should stress is that if you really want to do this, the thing to have done would have been in the fall to save some of your fall leaves. I mean, you might have some, if you do a spring cleanup, you might have some leaves and whatnot, but the thing to do, like I make sure that one of my bins is just filled with leaves at the end of the fall. And I also happen to have a nice little area back in the corner of my yard where there's a fence between my yard and my neighbors. And I just pile up the leaves back there by the fence. And that way in the summer, spring and summer and fall, before the next season's leaves fall off the trees, I've got something to add to. I've got that 3-to-1 leaves to food waste to add to my food waste. So for example, today I'm going to go dump a bucket of compost in my add to bin, and I've got some leaves from last fall that are sitting there, and I can use those to mix into my compost. But if you don't have leaves, if you get a newspaper, you can just mix. I would shred it. I would not just don't take the section of the newspaper and sort of put it in the compost bin. You want it to be fluffy, so it doesn't need to go through a shredder, like a mechanical shredder. You can just take a piece of newspaper and just kind of rip it into maybe 1 or 2 inch pieces, so that it's a little more surface area, a little less matted, and then it'll decompose better. Any other questions?
All good here.
Yeah, me too. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. This was great.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much for coming. Thanks for hopefully you all know, if you're a member, or even if you're not a member, if you get our you can sign up for our email newsletter list. We're going to have a plant sale soon in April. We're going to have an early spring plant sale for cold hardy things like peas and lettuce and kale and chard and things like that at the farm. And hopefully you can order online every week to order vegetables. The farmers are growing beautiful salad greens and kale and spinach at the farm right now. They've been growing all winter long in the greenhouses, and you can shop.
My wife just picked up our bag of that.
Yep, good. Store.hollyhillfarm.org, and there'll be another plant sale later in May for all the warm weather crops, tomatoes and peppers and all kinds of fabulous things. And if you're a member, you get early entry into the plant sale. And actually the plant sale this year is going to be in person. We're going to do timed entry so that we'll limit to I think the Board of Health is going to limit us to 12 people, I think, at a time. Actually, I don't know what the number will be, whatever the Board of Health dictates. But this year you'll be able to come and browse around and get your plants
Nice.
yourself. Yeah, last year we had to do it all online, which was painful.
Yeah.
It was hard for us, and it was hard for people. People wanted to shop, but we couldn't allow people to be on the farm. But this year it'll be different. And then at some point this spring, the farm stand will open up and you'll be able to shop in person. So who is it that said you're moving from Boston down to Cohasset?
That's me, Meredith.
Okay, great. So have you ever been to the farm before?
I haven't actually. I didn't even know it was there, and I grew up in Hingham. I had no idea.
Oh my gosh, how did you find this workshop today?
Just been exploring Cohasset and super interested in this kind of
Awesome.
stuff, and I'm excited you guys are going to be.
Oh, well, then you'll have to come by and say hello. So yep, it's a historic farm. The barn, the main barn was built sometime in the late 1780s, mid 1780s. And there's about 2.5 acres of growing fields, and we have animals, and in the summer we'll start having a weekly market. There's a farmer's market in Cohasset where you can shop, but you can also come to the farm and shop. And we have a whole, have you seen our online store?
Mm-hmm. I have.
Good. Okay, great.
I can't wait to check it out.
All right, any last minute questions before I end our time here? All right, well, if you think of anything later, I will email all of you. And if you think of anything that you forgot to ask, or some question that popped up in your head, feel free to email me. And I wish you all great success in composting.
Thank you,
Thank you
Janice.
so much.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.